Hey everybody, here we have a Dell Dimension E521 parts computer, and it's another one of those hard to find AMD based Dell machines. And I paid, let's see, $20 for this one. It has a AMD Athlon 64X2 CPU, Windows Vista Basic. Not sure how big the original hard drive in it was. Has a DVD burner, which I believe is a SATA drive. Let's go ahead and crack this one open and have a look inside. And of course there's the sticker with the price on it. I get these things from Google Computer Works. Okay, here's what the inside of this machine looks like. And has an NVIDIA chipset, probably a GeForce 6100 LE, because I see the Enforce 430 South Bridge on the motherboard. And yes, that DVD drive is SATA. And let's go ahead and test this and see if it works. But first, I have to grab some memory for it. It takes DDR2. Okay, got a stick of RAM installed. We got a power supply connection hooked up. The video connection. I don't have a keyboard hooked up just yet because I didn't feel like digging up my USB keyboard for this Dell, because these newer Dells don't even have PS2 connections on them. And I'm pretty sure this one doesn't work, but let's see if I'm wrong or if I'm right. Let's see if it either works or doesn't work. Not much of anything. Yep, it is dead, because watch. Kind of hard to tell, but I don't think my camera's picking it up, but okay, it is. You press the power button, try to get this thing to turn on, and this is all it does. It's not even twitching the fans. Obviously, have a serious motherboard problem. It's probably a bad chipset. It seems like these NVIDIA chips, if you don't cool them just right, and of course with everything being RHS compliant nowadays, designed to last about 4 years and die, the lead-free solder under the North bridge will basically what will happen is it'll form micro cracks in the solder, and due to the chip overheating all the time, it will actually, the solder connections will actually break and lose connection with the motherboard. So the only way to fix this will be to reflow the motherboard, which I only do that every once in a while because it's not always a very reliable fix. Let's get this heatsink off here so I can show you a little bit better. Kind of hard to do with one hand, so I'm going to set the camera down. Alrighty. And just as I expected, this heatsink has the pink stuff on it. So no wonder it failed. They use this pink stuff and expect this very hot running chip to be able to cool like it's supposed to. And the most of the motherboards I see that have the pink stuff with NVIDIA 6100 LE North bridges tend to fail. And if I get a working one, the first thing I will do is, of course, after testing, make sure it does power on in post, I will clean this pink crap off and actually put on some real thermal compound to properly cool the chip. And usually that makes for a much more reliable motherboard. So yeah, nothing new. I see this pretty much all the time with mainly NVIDIA and some AMD chip motherboards, well, ATI chip or AMD chip. I see this happen almost all the time. It's another dead motherboard because of being ROHS compliant and not having its North bridge cooled properly. So my uncle told me that it was California that came up with the RHS compliance. I'm not 100% sure if that's correct or not, but more or less we can say thank you, California, for making a new standard that makes computers less reliable, and you so-called think it's to actually make technology better for the environment. Well, actually, when these components fail faster, it's worse for the environment when they end up in the trash cans a lot quicker. So yeah, this will be another parts machine. I'll be parting this one out. So let's go ahead and continue on. Let's go ahead and see what kind of CPU we have. Okay, well I got the heatsink out, and of course it ripped the CPU out of socket with it. And luckily again, this is the second Dell in a row this has happened to me. When I go to remove the CPU heatsink, it pulls the CPU out of socket. And this is one real downside to AMD's processors. And it's sad that they still make their desktop CPUs with this design. They have pins on the CPU, so there's no true locking mechanism on the socket. It locks a hole with the pins, but when your thermal transfer material actually holds the CPU onto the heatsink, and you go to remove your heatsink and you accidentally pull out your CPU, those pins end up under a lot of stress when they get sucked out of the socket. And in some cases, that can cause the pins to get bent very easily. And of course, when you're handling the CPU, it's a real thing you have to watch out for, not to bend those pins, because they can be a real pain to try to bend back straight. Otherwise, your CPU is just ruined. With the Intel socket design, it locks the CPU into the socket, and it doesn't allow the heatsink to pull the CPU out of the socket by the way the socket is designed. So that's one big plus to Intel. And of course, AMD now uses that on their server CPUs. So let's see if we can get this CPU here to break loose. Well, first I'm going to take this heatsink out of here so it'll stop doing this. And by the way, that's a very filthy heatsink too. Surprised I didn't mention that till now. It's nasty. Yeah, Dell's cooler design works good with Intel CPUs, but not so good with AMD's because it tends to rip them right out of the socket. It tends to rip the CPUs right out of the socket when you take the heatsink off. Alright, so let's see if we can get this out of here. Alrighty, now let's see if we can get this CPU out, stuck loose from this heatsink. I tell you, it is filthy. You have to be very careful when you're doing this. I just managed to pull it loose. Didn't take much effort at all, but you always want to be careful when prying this thing loose. Alright, so it is a dual core. Let's see what model. Well, it's going to be inserted to a socket so I can clean it off. Well, let me see if I can do this with my finger. Figure out where the spec is. Okay, it's up near the top. Let's spin this around. And of course I'm holding it by the edge. Okay, we found these specifications. It is an X2. It's a 3800 plus. So that's a basic dual core. And at least I know the socket 939 variants of these CPUs overclock very well. I'm sure these might overclock very well too. So anyways, another nice CPU. Now let's go and get that DVD burner out. Okay, so we have a Sony DVD burner. SATA interface. Not too bad. And next, let's go ahead and rip out the fan. And one thing I like about Dell is when it comes to their Dimension desktops, they always seem to have some pretty aggressive fans in them. The older Dimensions from the early 2000s would usually have a pretty aggressive 92mm fan, which usually that fan was thermally controlled, but you could bypass the thermal control by just shorting out the thermistor by squeezing the terminals together. These fans are controlled by the main board. And some of these fans really can put out a lot of CFMs. and the newer Dimension machines and the XPS computers and all the other big BTX Dells usually have 120mm fans in them, and these fans usually have some aggression to them. I mean, they will move a good bit of air. I'm not actually going to demonstrate this one because look how filthy it is. I'll have dust all over this room if I try to turn this thing on right now. But just look at the amperage on this fan. Your typical computer fan will usually pull about maybe a quarter of an amp, maybe 0.17 to 0.25 amps. This fan here pulls 1.4 amps. I've actually got another 120 out of a Dell. It was out of a Precision workstation. That fan is rated for like 1.8 or either, I think it's 1.8 or 2 amps, something like that. So anyways, that's the cool thing about these Dells is they come with some very aggressive fans. They can do some serious cooling. I mean, just look at this thing. You could use that on your motorcycle to cool its radiator. Another thing I like about Dells is their SATA cables. These kinds of Dells have pretty good sized SATA cables in them. Let's have a look here. Okay, here's one. This is a pretty average length when it comes to a SATA cable. This is pretty much the length that you would get if you buy one off the internet, or the kind of cable that comes with your motherboard will usually be this long. Now on the other hand, with this cable, it's got a lot of length to it. I mean, this cable is almost 2 feet long. Cable has a whole lot of length to it. Let's see when it comes to the very small form factor Dells. Oh, and I meant to mention about the fans in those small form factor Dells. They're usually either 92s or 80s, and they are usually Sanyo Sanes fans, which move a lot of air. Anyways, back to the SATA cables. These small form factor Dells tend to have very, very short SATA cables. And that's something I like. Here's a look inside the Cubic Mid-Tower Deluxe, and I've actually started using pulled SATA cables from Dell from my hard drives. The yellow SATA cable is actually a different cable from something else, but those two blue SATA cables on my lower 2 hard drives, those are from Dell's. They're very short, travel from the short distance between my hard drives and the motherboard. So now I don't have SATA cables straight out all across my case. I like that. And to finalize this video, here's a look at the power supply. This is a Hypro built Dell Model H305N-00 power supply. The outputs on this power supply are as follows. Plus 5 volt is 22 amps. Plus 12 volt A is 18 amps. Plus 12 volt V is 18 amps. So we have two 12 volt rails here. Have a 5 volt standby rail of 2 amps. Our plus 3.3 is 17. So it's a nice power supply. It actually has two 12 volt rails. But what's surprising is I don't see any PCI Express connections for a video card. That's the only surprising thing about this power supply. But the only downside to power supplies in Dells, or at least the newer ones that have the BTX case, these larger Dells anyway, they take a standard ATX power supply but fit it into a slightly wider from bottom to top case. You can replace this with a standard ATX power supply, but you'll have a small little gap in some cases. But the downside is you can't easily take this power supply out of this case and install it into a standard ATX case because it's just a little bit too big. But with this particular power supply, it appears they took a standard ATX power supply board and crammed it, well actually fit it into this larger case, because there is a noticeable gap between those heat sinks and the top of the case. I might be able to take this power supply board out and fit it into a standard ATX power supply casing and reuse this power supply. I'll be featuring this in another video though, because this power supply needs to sit for at least, I'd say, overnight before I start messing with it, because it was just energized. But if you can look inside here, it's actually a pretty nice power supply the way it's built. It's built pretty well. Not bad at all. So anyways, now let's look at this Dell machine I got for 20 bucks from the Google Computer Works store. That's just another good example of how you can get good deals at the Google Computer Works store. Thanks for watching.